Well, hello. Welcome back to the Peripheral Views podcast. This is your host, Jake. Erroll is my co-host yet again. We're back for our 13th episode, a fourth installment into the biography series. First things first, what's up, Erroll? How we doing tonight?
Oh, not too bad. Same as always. Same as always.
Hanging in there. That's what I like to hear. So, we're going to dive into the biography series tonight. First things first, we'll knock out a little bit of housekeeping just to hit the notes. You know where they are. You can catch us on X/Twitter if it fits you, at peripheral V123. Find us on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/peripheral views 123. We are also we have a YouTube channel. Throw us in the search bar, youtube.com, peripheral views podcast, quick and easy to find. And please subscribe. Do us a favor and not only subscribe, but leave some commentary, some feedback for us. As per usual, we're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you happen to listen to us on either one of those platforms, please hit the subscribe button, rate and review for us. Helps us out a bunch, keeps the traffic flowing. And lastly, we are at peripheralviewspodcast.com. So check out the new website. All of our content is uploaded on there, along with we've got a ratings page that we submit every time we do a piece of content in the film series or the music series. We'll be putting our ratings up there as we course along through the development of the podcast. Bunch of contact stuff on there too if you want to reach out. So also, I should hit our Gmail is peripheralviewspodcast@gmail.com for any further feedback. So that's the formalities. Let's dive in. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to be talking about a literary figure coming out of the Far East. Our previous episode was on the Martin Scorsese theological epic Silence from 2016. That was a deep dive. We had a lot to discuss, and there was so much to discuss about the film because there is just so much theology and religiosity in the film, and it does take place in basically the same location that we'll be discussing today's figure. We are talking Yukio Mishima, a literary figure from the 20th century, a monumental Japanese figure in the world of literature as far as that goes. An author, and I like to call him an exhibitionist. I think that's like a nice. I've read that term to describe the man.
I've heard curator.
That's nice. That fits too. Absolutely.
Like a curator of both his own body and of like spirit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's like I mean, we'll get into the details of like how that fits as a descriptor for him because he was just a unique figure and had some unique perspectives and worldviews that we'll start diving into and how he kind of channeled that, like the channeling of his like spiritual beliefs slash political beliefs slash cultural beliefs was like very fragmented at times and also like pretty could also be pretty straightforward and also very extreme at other points. So, but we'll get into those details. I wanted to hit a couple of notes while we're talking, I guess, literature. Just to before we dive into the content of the day, I like to do a little bit of personalization of where Errol and I are at with literature. So, Errol, I'll let you kick it off first if you do have anything. Any books or big articles, anything like that you've been reading? What's your reading? I guess your reading diet as of late.
Nothing well, I was gonna say nothing too crazy, but I've been picking and prying at Dostoevsky's The Idiot.
Ooh, geez,
And
that's heavy.
like a quick rundown. It's just pretty much about I guess I want to describe him as like a lovable idiot, just like a guy who like means well, has like been well off, and he just wants to like help people out. And in a world where, you can just like profit off of other people, like it's almost like it's like you're stupid not to. It's like you'd be stupid to help people. So he ends up going to like an insane asylum because he figures that's the only place left for like good people in the world. I just started it, and I chose to start reading it just off of like the synopsis of that.
Wow.
But
Yeah. I mean, it's a pillar in the in the pantheon of like just world literature. Yeah, Dostoevsky, I mean, it's heavy content. It's like really, really deep stuff. And he does not, he, I guess the only like relationship I have with Dostoevsky is literally his only book that I've ever read was Brothers K, obviously.
well,
And
that's
that's
like his biggest one, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, it's like the one, and that's why and it was a slog because I'm not like a voracious reader. It took me I've gotten through it probably in total actually twice. Imagine that. But like never one full. I guess well, it was fragmented reading for the first go through, but the second time I piecemealed it like right after college, probably over 10 years ago at this point, and it took me like chunks of like several different months. I'd have to stop and then I'd walk away from the book, then pick it back up, and like, and obviously I've read like the Grand Inquisitor or the is it the Grand Inquisitor or Inquisition? I can never remember which, but that obviously that's like the big chunk of that book that's like really you know it's a major piece of literature that like attacks the topic of religion and its role in morality.
Hmm.
So it's like, it's just one of those. It's just one of those sections of a book that you kind of have to read. They tell you that, and I mean it's well worth it. It's one of those books I've actually wanted to go back to, and I think I probably will. I actually, speaking of which, I'll kind of push forward my reading catalog as of late. I've been reading a book. I've been terrible about novels and fiction reading in the last like 10 years or so. It's been basically nothing but a steady diet of nonfiction. What I've been reading right now is a book called Gross National Happiness by Arthur C. Brooks. And he's like this. He's actually been doing the rounds on the podcast like scene right now. He's been on Tim Ferriss and I think he was on Rich Roll. Just making the rounds because he has a new book out that he actually co-wrote with Oprah. Um, and he's basically a doctor of he's a professor at Harvard Business School, and he teaches like the most popular class there, which is like it. He talks about like the neuroscience of happiness, and
Hmm.
how like it's not you shouldn't like the idea, like I guess the main philosophy, if I can like chalk his like perspective up, is that like happiness is not like a destination, and people seem to think that it is like there's some finish line to it, and it's really just a feeling and you shouldn't chase it. It's about like acknowledging it. And he inserts like he interwoves like a lot. He's worked with like the Dalai Lama, so he's done a lot of work with like Buddhism and um
Well, yeah, I was gonna say it seems a lot like just living in the moment.
yeah, I mean it's more it's not even so much that it's like perspective. It's about how you interact or engage with your emotions. Like it's emotional management in a lot of ways. Like, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like only people who have trouble with emotional management, like emotional management is a task that everyone has to undergo. Like that's just part of being a conscious person. Like if you if you have consciousness, like you have emotions, and your brain is going to do a lot of different things with neurochemistry that you've got to manage. So it's yeah, his podcast rounds are great, and I've been trying to chip away at Gross National Happiness for a while now. I've actually had the book for a while, and I finally, once I saw that he's got a new book out, I felt like it was worth cracking into one of his older ones. And so far so good. I mean, it's like it's tied to a lot to like income, and like I think one of the parts of the book I remember most is like him saying something along he cited this data that indicated that like levels of happiness actually kind of level out, and then they start to slowly drop off once a person earns more than like $75,000 a year, which is like shocking to hear, but also not because
Mo money, mo problems.
bingo, Biggie said it. Biggie was talking about this shit way before some Harvard profess.
Because he learned that on the
He found
streets.
that shit
Like, he's
fascinating.
like, I could sell. He's like, what do I? He's like, how do I feel if I flip every single brick in the city right now and have all that money. He's like, what am I gonna do with that?
He's also just like, I got a target on my back though.
Hmm.
He was the man though. But listen, hey, we talked about this in previous podcasts. Like there is some fucking wisdom within the world of hip hop and some of these some of the right like because I mean hip hop is like like, there's the most amount of writing in hip hop. Like and it's gone a different direction in probably the last like 10 years or so, but the people who are like doing that writing, like the really like lengthy lyricism, like they've got to think about what they say, like a lot, and which means they're thinking about what they're thinking a lot too. So, but anyway,
Right. Yeah.
that's my selection. I've also been reading, well, two things. I've been reading. This is just passing. I just if I'm sitting on the couch and I'm just listening to my daughter talk my ear off. I'll just crack open. There's this book called Boundless Parenting by Ben Greenfield. He's like a fitness guy. He does a lot of like homeopathic stuff. Like he's a like endurance athlete, and he's I mean he some of his ideas are really good. Some of them are actually not so good, and I don't agree with much of them. But um, it's just a lot of it's nice to kind of like balance out the palette of parenting tools by just kind of diving into stuff, even if you don't agree with it. At least it kind of shapes your perspective or validates some thoughts you had about
Right.
parenting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly. Yeah. You don't know exactly how you feel about something until you encounter it.
Yeah, like for instance, like I don't know, Errol, you tell me, were you spanked as a child?
Yes, and then overall there was a threat of violence.
Mm-hmm.
So like my mom wouldn't be like, I'm gonna spank you like no matter what. Like if you're bad, you get spanked, but I'd be hit if I acted up, and then there'd be times where she'd be like, you know what could happen? And then I'd be like,
Right. Well,
like I
because you
do
do it
remember.
once and then it's like I make the joke all the time is like when I was really little, my dad like we didn't get spanked very I think maybe a little bit like really early on, but not really much. But my dad would like he would like when we were really little, he would like pinch our tush. Like if you got in trouble, he'd like send you up to your room and then you'd walk by him and he'd like pinch your tush on the way up. Just give
Pinch the
you a
grown
little
inch.
yeah, just give you that little one time just with the thumb and the index just on your way by. And I made the joke to my wife. I was like, I to this day cannot walk past my father without like feeling that like, oh shit, don't pinch my
Clen-
ass, bro.
Clenching up.
31 years old, that shit's still there. I can't get rid of it. Yeah. But it's one of those deals where like so like that's part of the book is like um I wanted it because I actually don't believe in like hitting kids, period. Like I think that's fucking I think it's like barbaric and like
Well,
it's
the thing is, you teach them that that's how you deal with
handle a
issues.
frustrating moment is with like
Yeah.
physical action and like but I wanted to hear the best argument for it that I could, and I actually found it in that book. And there was like, because he's like kind of religious, I guess. I mean, it seems as though he's. I don't know how it ties into his parenting, but like he was saying that like in the book he indicates that like if the child's doing something in to endanger themselves or others around them, then like that's worth a spanking. Or if the child is um who like overtly sins, like it does something against the word of God, and like that's worth spanking. Which like I definitely that one I can parse with easily. But then I was thinking about like if the child's like okay, the child is about to like burn themselves on the stove, and like you never want them to do that again and understand it, but you don't want them to burn on the stove. Like I can understand the pathway to being like okay, I need to introduce a physical outcome so the child knows that this is
So like
intended.
you learn it because here's the thing, you can learn something two ways. It's through like
Yes.
experience or like being told. And like if you are at a certain age and like you go to stick a fork in the outlet, like you don't learn that lesson like you might end up at the hospital. I think
Yeah.
outlets are like better now, but I'm not risking that.
No,
So
like for me,
you,
it's like, but can you get it? So like, if you have a child that doesn't communicate like with full language yet, like if they're still in like the development statement or stages of language, like how can you portray to them or communicate to them that this is like like their lives are in danger if they don't even understand the word? So to me,
you
it's
know
just like,
how
bro, you just have to do a better job of prevention, right? Like that's in
well
my
that and if you are raising a child like reasonably. Like you're never like not never, but you're rarely raising your voice, right? Like you're not like you're always like just trying to be calm and explain stuff. So if you do raise your voice, like if you just like yell or like you do like hey, like to get their attention, that's gonna invoke the same response that it would like not the same response, but the same
Yeah, similar.
merit, yeah, the same merit of response than it would be if you're like I'm about to beat your ass, like because you're gonna look over, or if you're just like hey, like what are you doing, if you're not always loud or you're not yelling and they go to do something and you're like stop, like they're not just gonna who let me gremlin my way to the outside the doggy door.
Well, it's also true what you just said. Like I've noticed that like at first when my oldest was like when she was starting to like, misbehave in like these little like 2-year-old ways and such, which there's plenty of. Um I noticed that like I absolutely noticed that the more I would give like stern tone to my voice, like I try not to like raise my voice. I try to avoid that. And I'm, as a parent, you have your slip ups. Sometimes you get a little louder than you should. Sometimes it's, sometimes you're stern when you really just shouldn't be. You're just being unreasonable and cranky. But I would say that like like I found myself starting to do that more frequently, like where I'm like using that stern tone. And guess what? You hit the nail on the head. That shit became way less effective.
Hmm.
Like she just stopped responding to it. And now if
Right.
I hit that tone, because like I've tapered it back again to like a reasonable frequency, now if I hit that tone, like she stops in her tracks, like, oh shit, I did
Well,
like
you see
that.
it like I don't know if you see it, but like out in public and stuff, people just be like yelling at their kids, like, oh, they don't listen. Like, yeah,
They're
because there's like no consequences. You yell at them all the time, and like they've
also embarrassing them. Like you're giving them,
right,
you're introducing like another layer of negative emotion, like in shame. You're making them
right.
feel like less than
So
in
they've built
public.
up enough defenses to like feel comfortable in their own skin to where
Oh yeah.
like yeah, like they want the attention.
We could like being I work in the public space, like in all of the public spaces. It's I could go on at length about the state of 21st century parenting, but we'll save that for a different podcast. The last little piece of literature I wanted to at least throw at you, haven't actually cracked this one, but it's on my queue. Like I'm actually waiting for a specific time period. I'll explain in a moment. But that book is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Graham. I have a copy of the book and I've been like back and forth, back and forth. Do I want to read it right now? Do I want to wait until the film comes out? I think I decided I'm going to wait until the film comes out. I want to see the film first and then I'll go back and watch. Because to me, it's like the film is probably more important to me because I just didn't, to me, it's like between books and film, I find myself watching a lot more film than reading as much these days. So like I want and the film is I got a feeling that the film is on like a pedestal, whereas like I know the book is like very well received, but I want to experience the film kind of like organically and then go back and like fill in the gaps with the literature after the fact. So October 20th, Killers of the Flower Moon by Martin Scorsese drops in theaters. Like, I don't know if we mentioned this on the airwaves on the last pod, but Erroll, I think we've basically all but agreed that once that film hits the theaters, I think you and I are going to probably introduce a nice little special preview episode on it. Good with that?
Yeah, kind of like the same thing we did with Oppenheimer, except a little more planned.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we'll just have something. We'll do like an hour and a half, something along those lines, just to knock out our initial thoughts on the film, and then, just like Oppenheimer, probably in the next year or so, we'll circle back to the film and talk about it a little bit more at length. Unless we hate it, unless it's like terrible, and I mean, it is 3.5 hours long, and if it's bad, it's going to be bad for 3.5 hours, which is like, you know,
Give us something to talk about.
yeah, I mean, there's plenty to talk about. We'll still do the special preview show, but if it lays an egg, maybe we won't circle back to it later. But if I
I
got a
don't know.
feeling,
I think
I
it's going to be
doubt it.
pretty hard to lay an egg with the reviews being like it's the best performance of Leonardo's. Like maybe it's just because the writer's strike and they're like, we need to milk this for what we can.
Could be.
We'll pay you to say whatever. Like,
Speaking of
but
which, I
we
do believe that that's coming to an end here pretty soon. Their negotiations are they're getting towards the finish line, hopefully.
hmm.
So.
I'll be able to
That
sell my
is,
screenplay yet.
sorry, go ahead.
I said I'll be able to sell my screenplay yet.
Oh, there it is. Anyways, we are let's move into the content of the day, shall we? That is the intro. We're talking today about Yukio Mishima, which it actually is funny enough. I actually didn't realize this until like way further in my research on him than I probably should have, being that it's actually on the front part of his Wikipedia. But his actual birth name is Kimatake Hirooka. Hirooka, is that how it's pronounced, Erroll? Am I hitting that okay?
That's how I would
Hirooka.
Kimetake here. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Hiraoka.
Yeah. So
Kimetake Hiraoka.
for the sake of the podcast, I think we'll just refer to him as his pen name, which is Yukio Mishima or Mishima Yukio, depending on. Um, I mean,
If you're
either way,
Japanese or not.
if you're Japanese, yeah. And but as English Americans, we'll just talk. We'll refer to him as Yukio Mishima or just Mishima. He's a Japanese author, poet, playwright, actor, model, Shintoist, nationalist, and founder of Tatenoke Shield Society in Japan. A monumental figure in the world of Japanese literature. Um, and
Um,
Go ahead, Errol.
outs. Oh yeah, and in the literature, he was considered for a Nobel Prize in 1968.
Right. Yeah. Like so. Yeah. His career is like very well received, but yet his I would say that like not quite considered prolific. I don't believe his actual bibliography is like particularly lengthy. But he did, like I said, he was a bit of a Renaissance man. I mean, I guess he did write quite a few pieces of literature, largely, but in terms of like full novels, the ones that like were really monumental or had an impact on the culture in like a very serious way were, I mean, there was about what would you say, Errol, four or five of them. Probably Confessions of a Mask, the what is considered his autobiographical book, and somewhat of a fictionalization of his experience. He released that in 1949, and that was, I think, to this day, probably his most revered work. Would you agree with that? Is that okay to say? I think.
Um, so I think you may be right on that. I've also heard that his the most famous being the Temple of the
Golden
Golden
Pavilion.
Pavilion.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it might not be a hard grasp, but I guess the Sun and Steel is pretty popular, but it's pretty popular amongst like white supremacist groups and like other
Right.
well, when you think about it though, like his whole kind of spiel was building yourself up to a like heroic form and then legitimately like dying a
Dying
hero's
with honor.
death.
Right. Dying with honor.
So a lot of people who are on that like kind of like terroristic or like that idealistic they just want to like die for their country or die for an idea. It's kind of really easy to get behind, and so for that reason, I can definitely see how it's problematic. But the thing is, all words can be twisted, and that is one of the reasons why I really like Mr. Mishima, because he did not like words. He preferred the solar uh words. Words only can convey so much, kind of like a the way I see it, it's like a first person reference, a second person reference, like a or a third person or like perspective. Like if you read a book and someone was, or if you read a book about an event that someone was like there, that's like a firsthand experience, and that's probably a really good re- relaying or retelling of what happened there. And it's definitely going to be a lot better than if, some people like us just did research on it. But it's a whole nother thing to like physically be there and actually like live and experience it. And he believed that that's how you should treat life. You shouldn't sit around like reading or like, discussing the ideas when you could actually go out there and make yourself better.
Yeah,
Um,
he reminds me this like perspective that he had on experience was like very much reminiscent of the speech that Robin Williams' character in Good Will Hunting gives on the park bench when he tells him like, you know everything just because you read Oliver fucking Twist. But like you don't know what it's like to watch your best friend die in your arms on the battlefield. You don't know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. Like life experience is more valuable than like your interpretations of someone else's descriptors or writings about it. So like I think what you're saying is actually well, it's also very ironic to coming from a
The warrior poet
right,
Nobel
yeah,
Prize.
right. Like he and a very very talented writer. As we'll get into like some of the pieces of writing. We'll pick up we'll drop a little bit of the like some quotations from some of his writing. That I've got a few things pulled up, but like his writing is second to none. I mean, truly a unbelievable talent. But let's start off a little bit with his early years, like how he kind of started off.
It was actually a second to Yasunari Kawabata. He was the guy who got the literature
That's
Nobel
who
Prize.
that's who beat him out in the prize.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, but his early years basically were I mean kind of brutal, just like you would expect in like early 20th century Japan. And obviously for many of the reasons his talents for writing were like basically started. I read that it was basically around 12 when he did his first piece of true writing. Obviously he had been developing a writing skill before then, but his he was sick as he wasn't even he barely lived when he was born. Like he almost died as a newborn, and then he almost died again when he was 5 or 6. He had like vomited this like brown vial, and they thought that he was basically he was on his deathbed as a child like multiple times, and um miraculously survived both not tuberculosis. It was kind of undiagnosed as to exactly what happened to him, but was like
they
very
thought it
sick.
was something with his lungs, though, right? I believe that's why he wasn't.
Yes, yeah, it was
Yeah,
clearly like a lung disease of some kind, but it wasn't tuberculosis because most people who got he mentions, well, it's mentioned many times through many different sources that I use, that like people around him were dropping dead of tuberculosis all the time.
oof.
But so I don't think he would have survived that if it was tuberculosis. And this being the case in his experience, like he kind of grew up like very pale and sickly, and he was like kind of tormented by his classmates quite a bit from that. And I guess what I also read was that his academic experience as a child was actually pretty open minded. It was very unusual. It was like extremely unusual for him to for a Japanese academic setting to like open their curriculum to um, European literature or European or anything westernized. But his experience was not that. He actually had access to Western literature, which was like probably a major factor in his writing skill development.
Hmm.
Um,
Um.
Sorry, go
So,
ahead.
yeah, the that sick pallorness when he started developing his writing skill. Um. So I believe that's almost why he started, because you're saying earlier like it's almost it's kind of crazy how the person who talked about like the person who was an author went from that to disliking words and just talking about like doing stuff. But I believe personally that that was built from the resentment of his childhood. He saw himself, or like the educated, as, sickly. The reason you were sick is because you were a product of your environment. He would stay up all night studying, reading books, and
In
he wasn't.
secret,
Yeah, and
he
like,
mentioned
because
that
he
in secret,
was.
his father very, very much disapproved. I guess while he was with his parents, I should say that his father like very much disapproved of his interest in writing and literature.
Mhm. And so I believe it's almost like a perfect parallel to like people today. Um, like myself, I would just sit at home, like stay up all night, play video games. Like, you gain a little bit of weight. You don't have the sunlight. You look a little bit paler. Like you look like you've been like sitting around doing doing nothing as opposed to someone who like actually works or so the reason or one of the things that like stood out for him is one day he was walking and he seen someone with one of those Shinto shrines like carrying it on his back, and
Hmm.
he's like, oh my God, that's like a huge burden. And like the guy just looked tan from like being out there in the sun and like strong from carrying the shrine all the time.
Right.
And then he was like, this man's actually out here like looking at the beautiful blue sky. Like he is here living life. He's and then Mishima was like, when I was in my books and like doing all the reading and writing, he's like, I would just try to describe this beautiful sky, but I wasn't actually here like experiencing it. And he's like, there's no way any of those words could convey the actual beauty of life. The most that words can do is corrupt the beauty.
Right, because it distorts the actual image of. So it's like you have two options. You can either like use imaginative descriptors to describe or to write about something visual, or you can be inspired by something visual and like let that inspiration kind of blossom within you to write about what you're seeing. And I feel like that's true for a lot of artists in a lot of different ways. Like it's like I think this guy just absolutely nailed it with this specific perspective. We'll get into some of the other perspectives as we move along through his story, but like um that perspective is, I think, like super valuable, and it's also really valuable now in this century, in the 21st century, with like obviously the uptick in screen time and screen use, and being that we live in a pretty distracted society now with like the inability to kind of like stop and look around. So I think that, like, this message is great, and I think that helped along his writing. I think that's why he became such a amazing writer. But anyway, so one of the parts of his story that's like pretty important. I don't want to skip over it. Is that he actually does live with his grandmother for a while, right? Like so, like um, he's like his early childhood is spent with his grandmother, who I would I don't want to say that she was a poor influence, but like it seemed as though she had a very strict and constrained set of disciplines that she wanted him to uphold while living with her. And this very much included, like, she did not allow him to spend time with like boys. Like it was basically all females, and like dressing up and dolls and like very like feministic. Basically, she kept him away from anything masculine for
Ooh,
the
so
time that
like
she was there.
he, because I'd like to describe him in my mind as like a warrior poet. It's almost like he was like a like grew up because it wasn't like his whole childhood, and I'm just learning about this, but it has it reminds me of the geisha,
Oh, right, right.
where they were just supposed to be beautiful and know stuff.
Hmm.
Like that's
Yeah,
all their just to like know stuff and be cultured, and also just yeah, be like graceful. So
yeah. It sounds to
they
me though that he was like actually kind of resentful of this, because while it did give him time to, it gave him a lot of time to like continue reading about like mythology, and this is like more so his early childhood. Like I think that it kind of rounded him out in some ways, but I also think that he like lashed out about this later because he couldn't
well
really
that
develop like masculine social experience that he probably would have benefited from at that age.
I don't think it's a reach at all to assume that it's one of the reasons why he's detested uh like literature so much, like the actual like the why he had that change of heart where he's like you know, you can only talk about so much, but the only thing you can really do is like change your body,
Right. Yeah.
um or like change yourself. So I think I think that there's a bunch of stuff that happened. You could be the childhood. uh I'm kind of a jerk, so part of me just wants to be like, oh, he is mad that he got second place, and he's like, I bet I could beat his ass though. I bet I can steal Jakku. Bet he can't do that.
But he can't curl his waist, bro. Uh,
Right? I bet he can't be jacked.
yeah. Oh yeah. He gets jacked. He definitely gets jacked. I mean, that's definitely a part of the story too. But
Well, without sidetracking too much, like
sure, go for it.
what a what an absolute like powerhouse. He was author, poet, playwright, actor, model.
Renaissance man.
Yeah, and had a militia military group. Like that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean he did. Yeah, I mean he really did. And like I don't know, a lot of these experiences, he did all this before he was 45, which will
Ooh,
obviously
and he almost was a kamikaze pilot.
yeah, he dodged that, right? So that's like kind of the next segment of like his backstory is that like so I think it was when was it? It was he was like 18, 19, somewhere in the late teens, and he's called like he gets that so like the it was described in the source I read that like he when you were called upon to be a kamikaze, you would get a pamphlet, you would get a notification in the mail, and typically you had two different types of notifications. You would get like a normal one that was on white paper, and it would indicate that you've been drafted into the Imperial Army and you're going to war. You're gonna go defend the oceanic fronts of Japan, right? And then you on the other side of the coin, you would get a notification in red, and that indicated if you got that red notification, that meant that you had been drafted into the kamikaze position with the Imperial Army, and now you're basically you get that red flag in your mailbox, and that is a death sentence. Um,
Um,
Not for him though.
right. But
Um,
like what a thing to like. So it's I've heard it's a split bag. Uh, while you do have the overall like tradition of like sacrificing for the greater good and like doing what you can to bring honor upon your family, and being a kamikaze pilot was seen as like one of the most honorable sacrifices that you could make, if not like the most at the time, because like they're
right.
just like, how brave are you just to know you're gonna die? Like that is like, there it's so when you think about it, it's kind of like a what seppuku. Like they're already killing themselves for like if they disgrace themselves, like you could do this and bring honor like all in like one time. So it's like there's almost no other culture I think that could like whip that together other than I guess now there's religions and stuff, but there's not
Well,
I don't think there's like a nation that could like
Well, let's talk about it a little bit. I mean, what are your thoughts on? Because for me, it's like it's easy to answer this question, but I'll ask you because you might have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective on it. Like, do you find the honor killings or the honor suicides of like the suicide culture of Japan, which like in some degree still persists today in like a different way, but we can get into that how it's different, momentarily. But like, I want to know what you think because for me, I'll explain what I think, and then I want to hear what you think. Like
Mhm.
the suicide culture of Japan to me is like it's like while I find it to be like I see the honor in it, and it's like because it's the deepest level sacrifice that you can imagine is to like give your own life for your country, for the emperor typically, and for your family. Like this is like I personally find it to be morally bereft. Like I don't actually see any moral or ethical value there. And I know that people it's not really something that's been like I don't think researched heavily enough by like Western science or Western psychology.
Mhm.
I think it's terrible. Like I just think I feel awful that this is a part of their. While it does two things, I think that the suicide culture is very much tied to the honor culture of the Far East. So it
Ooh,
produces very.
you remember how we oh sorry to cut you off
No, go ahead.
like you said like it's tied into the honor and stuff like that, so like there it is like a deeper meaning. You remember how we were talking earlier innocuously enough about like raising your kids?
Right.
Imagine if that's just something on the back burner. Like if I do something bad enough or if I disgrace my family bad enough, like the best at one point, like the best thing I could do in Japan was just to totally kill myself. So like when you're raising kids and stuff, like you're just like, oh no, don't do that. Like you have to kill yourself. Like you know what I mean? Like it's probably like a little more nuanced, but like that is a like it's a societal
Pressure.
construct in a pressure that is
It produces
it's like a
highly successful and highly ambitious, and it produces warriors, which is like I it's undeniable that that type of like pressure cooker of a culture and that type of like inculcation of um I mean it's fear in a lot of ways, but it's also just like this very intense level of and depth of honor produces like it's going to produce a society that in a lot of ways is more disciplined, is more focused on ambitious ambitions and on production and development and like probably living in a moral way while still alive. However, like it makes me wonder, like, so like there's a concept of like, I actually just heard this in this Arthur Brooks podcast, but it's like, so it kind of fits nicely here. But like the question that was asked in the podcast was simply like, would you rather your child be a psychopathic genius, or would you rather them be like moderately or reasonably intelligent but happy and enjoy their time alive? And like I think if you apply that to this like logic, not to say that like Japanese people are typically like psychopathic geniuses, that's not what I mean to say. I just mean that you wonder if like while they are ambitious and while they have like a moral standard that's typically a bit higher, and they have their nationalism will be a big topic of today's podcast in relation to Yukio Mishima. It makes you wonder if like that nationalism comes at a cost of probably a lot of psychological trauma and unhappiness in within the Japanese culture, I would think.
So I would have to agree. I don't think there's a lot of other cultures that have so much of like a pressure cooker going on
I
to
agree.
where everyone is held to such a high standard because the thing it's almost they're almost like the true embodiment of like you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Mm.
Um they pretty much just assume that everyone in your day-to-day business is going to like perform their jobs like at 100% because that is what is expected of them. And that is like you're saying like when it comes to like happiness and stuff, I believe like they're just kind of like a lot of like the Buddhist like mindsets and stuff. It's like just live in the day. Like you will be happy if you perform your task, your daily toil.
It's not only
Um,
that; it's almost like there is that's what I mean is like I actually think that like you can't tie fulfillment and honor and things that are considered like morality or of moral value. You can't tie them to production or success. I think that like it's I mean this has been proven on a scientific level or neurological level. Like you don't get to experience the whatever it is, the endorphin or the dopaminergic experience of happiness, whatever that neurochemistry is. You don't get to experience that without negative emotion. Like one does not exist without the other, and the Buddhists
well,
know that.
it's the yin and yang. It's
Yeah,
the
bingo. Right.
Ouroboros.
Right. Right. So like this and whatever. I'm giving a very rudimentary and like very ignorant way of describing Japanese culture. I'm sure that there are aspects of it that are like extremely fulfilling and like do reach for happiness in a more but this aspect, I'm just speaking upon this aspect of Japanese culture, which was very much endorsed by Yukio Mishima um on and off throughout his professional career, his personal life, and especially his relationship with Emperor Hirohito. So, I just feel like it's important to point out that like while there is some like a deep level of to be learned from an individual like Mishima because he had perspectives and worldviews that were like unique and specifically unique to Japanese culture. Um, I don't know. I just think there's an aspect to it that could be questioned.
So you also got to consider the time where he was raised.
Very
Like
true.
he he got that red letter for 2 seconds. He's like, I'm going to die for my country.
He
Like
was,
that was set in his mind.
but and you
It-
thought that like if you would think that like especially given the way his story shook out that he would be like that would be something that he would look forward to or that he was like proud of. But like what I had read was that when so he we'll move this. I'm just gonna push the story along. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Errol. I just want to
mhm.
put we'll circle back like as soon as I'm done describing what happens here, but I just want to fill the listeners in. So when he gets to his when he reaches the Imperial Japanese Army, um he actually is sent home. So he's got a cold, right? And they ask him like he's kind of sick. And the medical when they're doing like a medical examination, they want to find out like they don't want people with tuberculosis there, because that's running rampant through basically the whole world at this time and for basically hundreds of years prior. But he basically says like um he writes in Confessions of a Mask that he fails the exam. So he only has a cold and he's pale, he's sick, he's sweating, he's got the cold sweats. He's just got a cold. He doesn't have tuberculosis. But he lets the medical examiners believe that he has tuberculosis and they send him home. And he describes that feeling of being unfit for duty as something um he was happy about at the time. And then he felt like a tremendous amount of shame and guilt um, for like years and years about feeling not about being sent home. I mean, partially that, but also that he was happy to, and he lied to go home. So like that guilt and shame would be manifested in his like bodybuilding and his like um
Right. He just looked
complex build.
gross enough on a bad day to where the doctors thought he was had a like a
Tuberculosis.
yeah, had like a disease.
And he didn't and he let them think that like and that was something that he wrote about as being like one of the more like regretful moments of his life, and it really shaped his worldview going forward because he felt as though he let his country down, and he let the emperor down by not serving. So he basically it said that he did anticipate leaving, and he appeared happy to go and become a kamikaze um, fighter. But when he was given the opportunity to back out, he let them think he had tuberculosis, and it was a major regret in his early days.
It's actually a perfect circle back though, because um one of the only like with the because I believe you're talking about like how could they justify like suicide, or like whether it's the ritualistic suicide or like the kamikaze. Um I believe it's a little bit of one hand feeding the other. With them having the history of both like the samurai and the Bushido code, as well as the sacrifice and people like sacrificing themselves for doing something like dishonorable, or like the honor code in general. Um, the Japanese were really good at using that code of Bushido and revamping it to the new age. Um, they were fighting like a they had an impossible task, and they knew that they weren't going to be able to beat that impossible task if they were willing to throw literally everything at it, including their lives. Um, when it comes to uh, a kamikaze drone, so I don't want to give it such a poor analogy, but I'm going to anyways.
Let's hear it. I like it. I like where you're going with this. Let's hear it. Give me the worst one you got.
Yeah, so it's not exactly the same. We're not, because we're on one end we're talking about human life, on the other we're just talking about a drone. But you've had to have seen recently how the Ukrainians are just using cardboard drones
Mhm.
to like blow up like everything, like from like the Russians like naval stuff to like just important uh like areas.
Yeah, like precision strikes in like very vitally militaristically vital um
Right.
locations.
With calculated loss of we're going to use this cardboard and like the time and then get that done. It's
Right.
just they did not have the technology at that time. They're like, what we can do is send people there with explosives and then have them confirmed like hits on target, because it is like it's they're guided as a guided missile. It was, for lack of a better word. They actually the United States thought about training pigeons to be guided missiles.
Yeah, no, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah, so it was just like a
tough
whole
time. Basically, it's a very difficult time to be
so
like,
but so when you think like they were considering the cost of the life plus the cost, and actually, so they didn't even start doing the kamikazes till the end of the war, because what would happen is same thing with Germany. Um, all the really good pilots would go back out, and then you could only go out for so long before you didn't come back. And then they didn't have the wherewithal, they didn't have the planes or the people to train the pilots. But what they could do is they could train them to get the plane up in the air and fly it into a direction. So at one point they're legitimately like training people on like wooden stokes, like here's your throttle, here's the gauge, it's gonna go like that, because it didn't matter, you weren't like landing it. Like so
right.
you
It
just
doesn't
needed to
matter.
know how to you just needed to know how to get it started and get it up, and then like get the gist from there, feel it around, and then just so that's like it's. I will never say it's a good idea, but I can absolutely see where they were coming from. Like they
As
were
as a militaristic tactic.
and there was one point before like the nukes where the Japanese people were willing to fight tooth and nail. The saying was like a million lives for or a million for one or something like that. And it's like a million lives for like one nation, and it was like they you're gonna have to kill everyone in Japan to beat Japan. Um, that's why that one guy who was on the island, or they found him. It was like a whole bunch of years after the war,
Yeah, and he still
and he
thought
just
that the
had
war was maintained, like that was
yeah.
going on, right?
Yeah, he
Yeah, I
thought the
remember
war
that.
was still going on, and they're like, "No, it's over." And he's like,
I
"No,
don't
it's not." And he's like, "Oh, well, like, let you talk to Japan. The war's over." And he's like, "No, now you're definitely lying, because if the war was over, either Japan would have
not
won or
exist.
Japan wouldn't exist." He's like, so they brought him like the newspapers, and then he's like, "Yeah, yeah, anyone could just write stuff."
You can't convince this
They
guy.
had to they had to get the guys lieutenant who was like
Yeah.
a salesman or something. He was like
He's
selling stuff,
also like hella old too. He's like fucking
right?
he's like this 89-year-old man. He's like
Imagine
a
that.
little senile, but this is the guy.
Imagine that door knock too. They're like, yeah, like Benny's still in the woods.
He's
You're
still
like,
in the
what?
fucking bush, man. We can't get him
You're like,
out.
who? No way, no. You're like, yeah, you got it. He's not coming out unless you give him orders. You're the commander. And you're like, nah, I gotta see this. I'm like, I'm going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it was a wild time. I couldn't actually I was really looking, so like obviously there's a bunch of content on like his reaction to like the Japanese surrender in 1945. Like obviously he was like distraught and like completely in disbelief of it when it happened, but I couldn't really find his I wanted to find a reaction that maybe a public reaction or what he said about the nuclear strikes. But I really couldn't find any like dialogue from him on those, which is like kind of disappointing. I was really hoping to find something that he might have said about it because it's such a monumental moment in the history of the world. You would want to hear from like one of the who would go on to become one of the more famous Japanese people in the next 10, 20 years after the war. Um, it would have been nice to hear what he had to say about it and how it affected him and maybe his family, but alas, there was nothing much to be found there on that front. Let's move it forward. Let's go to post. Let's get like into the post-war era of his experience. So like obviously he doesn't serve. He goes home. Before becoming kamikaze, he kind of avoids that heroic death. But I believe the first thing he writes when he's like basically when the war is officially over is like what is it? I'm sorry. I want to pull it up here. I want to find out for sure exactly what the first thing he
While
wrote.
you do that, I found something
Let's
in
hear
an
it.
essay established on the 11th of August, 1967. The well-known writer Yukio Mishima surprisingly yielded a confession about why he never mentioned the trauma that the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had exerted on his psyche. And if we are to take his statement literally, his literature as well, the essay is titled "Hiroshima Inside of Me," uh, Watashi no Naka no Hiroshima. In it, Mishima describes the extent of the moral and psychic trauma that uh, psychic trauma that this event extolled on him as a youngster. The dead body of the juvenile, the dead body of the juvenile trauma inflicted by this event is perhaps exhumed here by a mature Mishima as a harbinger of what would be his intellectual legacy in terms of poetics. It is undeniable that in his novels, Mishima fostered or at least indirectly provided a model of the revision of the koku kokutai national national body, wartime rhetoric into the private obsession with the individual body that characterized much of post-war literature's involvement with the salacious and the carnal. The transformation of the traumas related to the war and the nuclear bombing can be related to a collective memory that post-war writers have upon or that have already touched upon. Uh, it's pretty much he didn't really have anything else to say.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's good. I'm Errol. I'm gonna have you send that to me, and for our listeners, I want to post that to our Twitter page, so that's going to be available. Because I'm glad you found that because I actually would like to read a little bit more in depth about that. Because that's super interesting. Because
I'll
I
send it.
want to know deeply what he, especially man with that title like Hiroshima inside of me, like that is just like I mean, because basically the only thing that I could ever find or listen to for that matter, even in the form of podcast, is basically his just reaction to. It wasn't so much that he spoke about the he didn't like the article says he doesn't really he maintained a bit of silence about the nuclear strikes, but he definitely had some like open distaste for the surrendering by the emperor. Um, but it didn't dissuade him. Like he maintained. I mean, obviously he has. So like Japan after in the post war begins to like democratize, right? Because like now they're occupied by U.S. military forces
Yeah,
and
and we forced them to open up.
yeah, and they basically are kind of forced into this. Um, but so he like obviously he has his qualms about this, and it seems as though that like his nationalism runs pretty deep. He strikes me as a bit of a like politically confused or alienated person. I don't think that like his politics were appeared more strong than I actually think they were. Um,
Yes, it's almost like he just wanted to stand for something, but like his beliefs were almost cemented in his like body alone. And so
yeah,
I don't want to like speak for him or anything because I haven't even I'm saying this and I haven't even like read one of his books like front to back. But
right.
they're
Likewise. By the way, likewise. We're doing a biography on a gentleman whose literature we haven't actually digested, but like um, needless to say, that's like his story is will pique our interest and hopefully listeners' interest to actually crack a few of his books open going forward.
right. That's the whole point of
That's
this
right.
spiel. But
Sweet.
yeah, like it almost feels to me like he had the game plan. He did everything. Um, he like honed his body, and then he was just like, now it's time.
Yeah.
He's like, now it's time to do that hero's death.
Yeah, and I think that like, well, it's like he the sword becomes the pen in this like in his life, right? Like because he just starts writing vigorously after the war. Like it really is kind of crazy how quickly he starts picking it up, and I think it's just based on like he started doing a lot of traveling. Like I think he came to America a couple times, saw Los Angeles and New York City, which I think at the time he admitted that like he thought that New York City was like 100 years ahead of Tokyo when he visited there in like the late 40s or early 50s. Um, but like, so his first novel was actually Thieves, which was a story about two young members of the aristocracy drawn towards suicide. Once again, like you guys, folks listening, like this is going to be a heavy theme. Mishima has like this true obsession with like beauty and death and how they intersect. Um, and like that's mostly exemplified in basically all of his novels, but certainly most in his second piece of writing, which was semi autobiographical, and that is Confessions of a Mask, where he basically publicly outs himself as a homosexual. Right? I mean, that's basically what the book indicates. Like the story is a, essentially told about him, but is from the perspective of a homosexual who is like who's hiding from society or hiding his
Oh,
sexuality from society. So like, I mean, he basically publicly outs himself, which at the time people didn't realize because they didn't realize the book was autobiographical. But like in hindsight, it becomes very clear that it was. And at the time, he was basically there were whispers, and then he actually marries someone to like kind of shush down the whispers of his homosexuality getting out, and he didn't want that to be public at the time. So he ends up like marrying a 19-year-old to just like um, to kind of quiet down the gossip.
well, so I didn't know that,
What's
but
that? Which part?
uh the I didn't know anything about that second book you're talking about,
Thieves or Confessions of a Mask?
Confessions of a Mask.
Yeah, so like it's the account of a young homosexual man. I mean, but it's from the perspective of the protagonist, but like it's all, I mean, the whole book is obviously about his struggles, right? But like I said,
Right.
it's not a public at the time. It wasn't launched as a autobiographical where like the character in the book is like acting as a stand-in. At the time it wasn't known that, but in hindsight I think it came to be known that like once people knew more about him, it was very clear that the book was
Well,
somewhat about him, or
a
mostly.
lot of a lot of the stuff that he's like done, or like a lot of the stuff that he's done, or like a really like stood behind, I guess, or like was like a proprietor for, not a lot of the stuff, but some of the things you could argue do have a sort of undertone of that of they do sort of have that undertone of
Homoerotica.
homoeroticism.
Right.
um so you have the perfecting of the body, and like just making yourself peak form, like he he thought like the best you could do is craft your own self up in a Greek god image. But it's a masculine hero, is what he was saying was like perfection. Also, when he went to Greece, uh,
Loved it. He was like obsessed with like Greek philosophy. Like
yeah, not just saying like, oh, we went to Greece so that they were pretty gay.
he was
But no, but the statues and stuff that he fell in love with, um, they are uh heroic, strong, masculine, naked figures. Um, but the meaning behind them though is almost is almost what he like lived. Like he almost took that he took the art that he saw in front of him that he liked, and he chose to sculpt himself. Uh, and so like there is also like a reason why they made those statues. Like everything, it's art, and like yeah, they just made like a perfect diorama of someone and it just looks muscular, but everything has a meaning. Your head is like your reason, and you always see them with like such stoic faces, and that's because in those in those heroic depictions in those statues, they have harmony of reason, harmony of the soul. Their chests, they always have big chests, which is where your emotion is held,
right.
or
Yep.
your thumos, your like chutzpah, your actual like the your passion almost, but not to be confused with your desire, which is in your belly, or your appetite, and like which is your genitals. So that's why these statues were drawn with the stoic face for the showing how reasonable they are and how they like weren't like unbalanced, like they were just focused. the big chest because they had big emotions, and they had small genitals because they had small appetite. They could
Hmm.
control their desire. It wasn't the main sell point of them. Wasn't their They weren't focused on the genitalia.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
why. Have you ever thought that? Like,
yeah, I've definitely thought that. I mean, pretty much
not to be
anybody
like
has.
not to be like, oh fuck, swinging over here, but I'm like, yo, look that little dick.
Yeah, I mean, well, I always thought that it was intentional, but I just didn't. I also, part of me also just kind of assumed that maybe like, I don't know, that like maybe back.
Maybe you're just swinging. Maybe you're just like, that's
No,
average
I just
back in the
thought that
day.
I was under the impression that maybe like we've like evolved, and they were just, I don't know, like because they're depictions of older male humans that like their genitalia just was smaller back then. I didn't, I didn't. I don't. To be honest with
It's
you,
just become the. It's just be.
not a whole lot of ponderment upon the genitalia of Greek gods or Greek statues.
It's just become more like the desired trait, so everyone just doesn't have like. But that's what it was. Is there? There's varying sizes of
Yeah, I'm
genitalia
sure
throughout
that there
time,
was.
but
I'm sure it's intentional, and there's probably some. It's just like, well, it's just like we said in the Silence podcast, our previous podcast, out on Apple Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud. Check it out. As we mentioned in that, it's just like people, because people were so much more connected to like their human experience, much more than we are now. It just feels like people were just, they could think more deeply and with such more, there was a lot more depth to the way that people approached the thinking process or the philosophizing of things. People spent time with they spent time with moments. They spent time with nature. They spent time with ideas. They would like,
so what Socrates said uh in like in that like feeling and stuff, he said like if you're a virtuous or the virtuous person harmonizes these three groups of himself, like your reason, your emotion, your desire, and you will like use those three notes like a musical scale, like high, low, and like the middle. So
harmonize or synchronize.
right. So if you like you were saying, like it seemed like these people were a lot more in tune with themselves. Like if you they're more willing to like, live the day to day, be in their emotions, control their desires, and also like, work on their like thumos, their emotion and their physical. So it's almost it's why back in the day that was seen as like the most heroic thing that you could possibly do, because there really was nothing much more. You know what I mean? And it kind of, I like to think it still does ring true.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's. I mean, in part for sure. Um, yeah. So on that note, Errol, what do you say we take a short break? Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're what I want to do is I want to bounce back to some of the literature. I want to give our listeners a little. Let's do a little bit of sampling of the writing. So I want people to kind of get an idea of just the talent of writer that Mishima was. So let's take a short break. We'll be right back with you guys in just a few minutes. When we get back, we'll discuss and quote a few pieces of writing from Yukio Mishima. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, folks. We're back with Yukio Mishima as the topic for our podcast today for the biography series. So we kind of coursed through most of his, his experience leading into into and a little bit after World War II. But before we get into the literature itself or any part of the literature, I thought Erroll and I would just read off a couple of excerpts or quotes from his writing, just to give folks an idea of like the quality of writer he is and the poetry in which he happened to compile across his career. So Erroll, why don't you kick us off? Give us an excerpt or a quote that you really found profound.
Um, so I took a cursory glance through some,
Mm-hmm.
and I really like I said, I didn't read through The Mask, but I should have figured that this quote was from or from
Confessions of
the
Innocence.
yeah, exactly. Uh, he goes, a man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. And I think
Wow.
that's like, I think that's holds a lot of truth. Like, people don't like
Sure.
to be vulnerable, but if you, look at online, give people
I was
that
thinking the same thing.
give them the anonymity.
Anonymity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get them that sauce, and then say whatever you want. Who cares?
Yeah, it's true. And it's like, well, it's the protection of identity. So like, you know, but it's interesting. Yeah, they speak in truths yet and with like unearned bravery at the same time. They're willing to say things that they think are true that they might not say otherwise, but they also are willing to say things that are blatantly untrue. So it's like this like double-edged sword, which actually makes for the online communication um, to be quite destructive. Which, as we've seen this online, where like the degradation of truth speaking is like happening before our eyes. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, no, that's a beautiful quote. I'm gonna drop one. This was from the Temple of the Golden Pavilion. This was the one that like kind of stood out to me, and I think it's one of the more well known ones for him. Quote: "What transforms this world is knowledge. Do you see what I mean? Nothing else can change anything in this world. Knowledge alone is capable of transforming the world, while at the same time leaving it as exactly as it is. When you look at the world with knowledge, you realize the things are unchangeable, and at the same time are constantly being transformed. It's like this." So end quote. Um, so it's like this like confliction. It's a confliction, but it's also like a paradoxical writing. Um, but I think that his like value in knowing things and like ensuring that he is like informed and educated and I mean I think he found the value in books really early in life, and I think in this quote I think he's like grappling a bit with like knowing that the value of knowledge is sturdy and stable and reliable, but also knowing that the lack of knowledge can not so much that the lack of knowledge can like leaves things a bit transfixed, but like also that like sometimes things should remain the same and sometimes they should evolve, and either way the making that choice is best made with knowledge, with knowing.
Yeah, I like to take that as a it's like a very like Buddhist take, and also like kind of what he stood for and how he didn't necessarily like he didn't like words. Like he understood that you need to have knowledge to understand like deeper meaning in things, but to a degree, um, while things are unchangeable, like you can describe something or like something that happened, they're at the same time constantly being transformed.
Right.
So the if you go to describe something, then it's not going to be the same thing that you described because it always changes. Like there's the best thing you can do is acquire knowledge so you can appreciate stuff as it happens.
Right. And everyone kind of processes knowledge differently too. Like everybody has like the human experience that's unique to them, and how they process information is always like it varies. It's all perceptive. I mean, but yet some things can only be perceived one or two ways, or I guess nothing can really truly be perceived only in one way. But like the truth, the truth within itself is the truth. And I think he just had a very like deep sense of wonder, like he had like I think he was like a deeply curious person, but also I don't know, like
I
he had
think due
he
to
had convictions too.
I think it was almost like the angst was misplaced because the time he grew up in.
Yeah, I think that's probably entrenched in some truth. Let me read something from Confessions of a Mask because I do want to. I think that I think, in my opinion, that's his most important piece, just because it's about him. So I think it was the most personal. I know that he had like a magnum opus that was like a tetralogy of books, The Sea of Fertility, which was like four different like major books, and that was kind of how he ended his life with those books. That's how his like career. He wrote them at the tail end of his life. And to him, he would probably say that Sea of Fertility is like the most important. But for me, in my perspective, it's like the most important thing he ever did for like his story is Confessions of a Mask. So this is from Confessions of a Mask. Quote: "What I wanted was to die among strangers, untroubled beneath a cloudless sky, and yet my desire differed from the sentiments of that ancient Greek who wanted to die under the brilliant sun. What I wanted was some natural, spontaneous suicide. I wanted a death like that of a fox, not yet well versed in cunning, that walks carelessly along a mountain path and is shot by a hunter because of its own stupidity." Which is like, oh my god, it's just heartbreaking. His like his fascination with death is just so clear, and
And
like he wanted to die, but like he wanted to die
what
by
a
suicide. But
what a stark difference between like him and Runaway Horses and like his feeling towards the end of his life, where in Runaway Horses he's like a perfect purity as possible if you turn your life into a line of poetry written with a splash of blood. Like he went from like, man, I just want to be taken outside like old Yeller, don't even know what's going on, to like, I need to die and go
intentionally.
to Valhalla. Like I
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
die a hero's death.
yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, it's almost like the quote that I read from Confessions, like about the mountain path is shot by a hunter. It's almost like he was like praying for a mercy suicide, like a mercy killing suicide, like because I think he was in like when he was younger, he was in more pain, you know. But maybe he wasn't so convicted about his like suicidal ideation. But definitely, you're right. At the tail end of his life, like what it was too is I think he developed like a bit of and this is just my perception on it, but I think he developed a bit of a more heartbreak from the I think he at the same time is developing like a more nationalism within him, and a nationalistic like ego about Japanese culture and about where the country was. I think he grew more and more heartbroken by like the abandonment of the emperor. Like cuz at one point I believe the emperor Hirohito like denounces his like status as a god, and like publicly states himself as being like a mortal man.
I
um
think that was like,
the tipping point.
I think that was one of the craziest uh, things that they put in that treaty. Like they're like, oh, you thought you were gonna get away with that? Nope. They're like, what do you mean that's on the paper? They're like, yep, you gotta say it.
Whether you believe it or not, right?
Right.
But
And
like,
because that is like it was like the way of life there. Like just to like go in and just be like, yep, you gotta, like that's a tough pill to swallow on not I mean on both sides, both the emperor and the people there.
yeah, but it took him 30 years. And we'll push it along. Like he becomes a militaristic figure, like and he develops like I think he attempts multiple different rebellions and coup attempts to overthrow the government, because I think he's just disgusted at this point with the emperor and his renunciation of like god status, and like this action step towards like first like growing more and more nationalistic, but then also like he gets people are listening to him, so like he's actually he actually like gets some training under the ground self-defense force, right? um and like soldiers start listening to him, and he starts like he's a deep right wing figure, and this is not like a Western perspective of right wing. This is just like nationalism, deep nationalism, and he wants Imperial Japan back, post World War II, right? And like this is very clear, and he is not
Yeah.
happy with the occupation of the United States in Japan, like, and definitely wants it to end. Um, Erroll, why don't you? I'll let you. This was your baby, so I want you to go ahead and just tell what happened. Let's talk about the coup, the final coup, in November of 1970.
Um, yeah. So a lot of stuff was just like I don't want to say like a lot of stuff was coming to a head, but I feel like so okay. Big yeah, before like right before we get into this, I feel like an important thing to circle back to is his whole motif in what or the best thing you can do is build your body up heroically into like a the best physique that you can cultivate so you can do something heroic. So
Right. Yeah,
that
we
in
shouldn't skip over that. You're right. That's really important.
well no, it's just a perfect like it'll go right into it. So
Right.
that is how he felt like deep down. Like he wanted to cultivate his body so he can um be in perfect physical form so he could do something heroic and die a hero's death. Uh he says something, and I'm just paraphrasing, that there's no longer like you can't die like a heroic death anymore or something like that. So but here's the while that's a pretty good message, like not like if you take it to heart, but like just build yourself up so if something happens you can sacrifice yourself. If you believe that wholeheartedly, the problem with that is the body deteriorates. You get
Mm,
worse over time.
right.
So you can only hold your body up to that perfect physique for so long before you're not able to lift as much as you can, or before you're not able to look as good as you were able to. So if you believe that wholeheartedly, there is going to be a high watermark, a precipice where you need to act, or it is all downhill and you miss your opportunity for that, you know,
Right.
for that actual heroic moment when you are at the pinnacle of your life and you do the pinnacle of your your reason to be here. That's the reason why they had all those statues depicting all that stuff. They were just like heroic, and then it's always either after triumph or something like that. Like a lot of those things, it's like after Medusa was beheaded and like stuff like that. All those statues, it's always like after heroic feats or like during. Um, but yeah, I think that was his downfall, is that he just believed too heavily in the idea that he was preaching. And that's here's the thing, that's not usually something to that's not usually a bad thing.
No,
Is
yeah, like we were saying, like he had like he may have been like morally or politically like conflicted through most of his life, but it seems like the later, as he started to like physically transform, so did his like convictions. They started to like sturdify and become a bit more pronounced, and definitely shifting into like a more right wing, not fascistic, but definitely nationalistic perspective. Very like anti communist, and like um, he had a lot of concerns. He also started like writing about like some science fiction in there. Like he was quoted as saying that like Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End he considered to be like a masterpiece. I've not read that, but Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey. Um, so he was
you
getting into some of. It's not to say that he was like getting strange, but like he's aging, right? He's in his 30s
right.
at this point, and he's starting to develop his a sense of the world that's more um steadfast in its convictions, we'll say.
This whole thing kind of it parallels Taxi Driver.
A little bit, yeah, man.
I didn't
It's
even think
really, I've
about it
thought
until
that
right
a couple
now.
times.
Yeah, then he builds up his body, all of his stuff, and then like
No
he
more poison.
right, and then he just doing all those push-ups, sit-ups, and then he just happens to come across something. And he's like, you know what? Nope, I'm standing up for it.
it's strange because he actually doesn't ever like he's a bodybuilder, quote unquote, but like he never truly gets that big. If you, I mean, he gets shredded like a motherfucker, but like he doesn't ever truly get like bodybuilder
Well,
like
it's
yoked. He's
also
just
well
really
the problem is uh protein.
right,
There wasn't a lot of, if you look at like strongmen of 1966,
probably not
um
quite as
you
big.
don't see anyone big until Arnold.
Yeah, yeah,
And
because
they're like, I mean, there's
anabolic
like bigger
steroids help
people,
that.
but yeah, but like you don't see like jack people until like, I believe until like the 50s or so. Like big as we know it.
Right. All right, well, let's shift in because this is we'll kind of try to close things out here. I mean, so I'll mention he wrote a few plays. He wrote obviously, as we mentioned before, he had completed at this point in the late 60s. He had completed his like the Sea of Fertility series of his books, which were like deeply personal and he considered to be his magnum opus. This tetralogy of books. He wrote a few plays. He wrote a play called My Friend Hitler, which was like deeply controversial, but like it depicted a bunch of like his views on fascism and beauty through like the using these historical figures as like a mouthpiece, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's there's some irony there. I don't think that he was like into fascism while he was like a bit right winged. He wasn't quite. I mean, very anti-communist. He wasn't. I don't think he was like fascistic. I didn't get that sense at least. But left wing people were definitely not fond of him at this point.
I think it's gonna be hard to you know, to have a good overall reception with a book titled that.
Yeah, well, he also just like the sympathizers of like right wing ideology in the post World War II era anywhere on the globe would probably just be other than maybe like Berlin. They're probably just like
Mhm.
probably a tough read, man. You're probably gonna get a
Yeah.
tough. You're not gonna get a very good reception. But like, but yeah, so things start shifting, and he very much is like done with the emperor and the emperor's denunciation or renunciation of like being a godlike figure, and so he attempts a coup. Right. Okay. So we're shifting into the closing of our story here. He attempts a coup to overthrow the Imperial Japanese Army. Um, in I believe where it takes place is in central Tokyo, and he's going to attempt to overthrow the government. Like this is his plan, because like I said, he wants to. I don't know that he had intentions of. Did he have intentions of like becoming the leader of Japan, or the new emperor of Japan, or was this coup simply to just get the government out that had basically surrendered 20 years prior, 25 years prior?
Mm.
I'm not really sure which, but one of the two. Um, but let's we'll go through his like how this all takes place. So it's 1970 in November, and he attempts a coup. Um, Mishima was by now in his 40s and acutely aware of his age. The beautiful should die young, and everyone else should live as long as possible. End quote. He wrote in a piece on the early death of the actor James Dean. Quote: Unfortunately,
Oh.
95% of people get it backwards, with gorgeous people lingering into their 80s and hideous fools dropping dead at 21. End quote. Mishima felt his moment was passing and began plotting his final act. Everyone at some point sees life as a stage, but few live and choreograph their lives as theater, and fewer still would use seppuku, which is a form of disembowelment and suicide, to close out their performance. For Mishima, though, it was the culmination of a lifelong fantasy. The elements had been there from the very start in Confessions of a Mask, Soldier's Death and Blood. Self transformation into a warrior had made him into the object of his desire, something beautiful, something worth destroying. And the fixation on seppuku had grown in plain sight. Mishima even wrote and starred in a short film, Patriotism, in which he acted out in detail. Perhaps Mishima's final act was a political protest too, but it was certainly death as art. On the morning of his last day, Mishima posted the final book of his tetralogy, The Sea of Fertility, to the publisher. These 4 books, written in a frantic burst of creativity, were something new. Starting in 1912, shortly after the Russo-Japanese War, and ending in 1975, they span a period of extraordinary change from the ascendance of the Imperial Japan through the annihilation of World War II and to the emergence of a capitalist, consumerist Japan. They are held together by one character, Honda, perhaps a stand-in for Mishima, and the repeated reincarnation of his boyhood friend, an enduring soul surrounded by change and decline. And the final words of that book. Sorry, I've deviated because I'm actually quoting an article by Thomas Graham from Culture.com. So I did want to touch upon his like final days here, but or his final piece of work, and
Hmm.
his the closing words of this book were this like stillness, this like this aspect, this stoicism, this like stillness entrenched in the words, and it goes something, it goes like this. Quote, it was a bright, quiet garden without striking features, like a rosary rubbed between the hands. The shrilling of cicadas held sway. There was no other sound. The garden was empty. He had come, thought Honda, to a place that had no memories, nothing. The noontime sun of the noontime sun of summer flowed over the still garden. So like I think this is like a perception of heaven, right? Like or
Mm.
true like heavenly peace. And that was the last thing he ever wrote. And then he attempts a coup in Tokyo and kidnaps. I believe he tries to kidnap a an officer, or does successfully kidnap an officer, and commits. He actually commits um, seppuku, which is a disembowelment publicly. And I believe there's actually film of it. Or was there actual film of it? I know there's film of the moment, but I don't think there's actually film of his actual suicide.
I didn't see it.
No, I watched it and it kind of you kind of think it's going to show him actually committing it, but it's really just him on a balcony. It's a very famous uh, photo. I've actually seen the photo before this. Had you been exposed to it before reading about him?
No, I don't think so.
Um,
Are you talking about the one where he's on the building?
Yeah, yeah. So let me read from Wikipedia here exactly how this shook out. So on November 20th or 25th, 1970, Mishima informed members of the Tadanokai, um, Masahiro Agawa, Masayoshi Koga, and Hiroyasu Koga used a pretext to visit the commandant Kinetoshi Mashida of Camp Ichigaya, a military base in central Tokyo and the headquarters of the Eastern Command of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. Inside, they barricaded the office and tied the commandant to his chair. Mishima wore a white hachimaki headband with a red Hinamaru circle in the center, bearing the kanji for "to be reborn 7 times to serve the country," which was a reference to the last words of Kisunoki Masasu, the younger brother of the 14th century imperialist loyal samurai Kasunaki Masahige, as the 2 brothers died fighting to defend the emperor. With a
And
prepared
that goes back to the that Bushido code to die.
right,
So like they believe if you're gonna if you're dying to serve your country, you're gonna be reborn 7 times. Like
seven
it's or
times
not like literally, but like the act of dying for your country is like might
worth
as well be
seven
born seven.
reincarnations.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. Continuing, with a prepared manifesto and a banner listing their demands, Mishima stepped out onto the balcony to address the soldiers gathered below. His speech was intended to inspire a coup d'etat to restore the power of the emperor. He succeeded only in irritating the soldiers and was heckled with jeers and the noise of helicopters, drowning out some parts of his speech. In his speech, Mishima rebuked the Japanese self-defense forces for their passive acceptance of a constitution that, quote, denies their own existence, end quote, and shouted to rouse them. Where has the spirit of the samurai gone? In his final written appeal that Morita and Agawa scattered copies of from the balcony, Mishima expressed his dissatisfaction with the half-baked nature of the JSDF. Quote, it is self-evident that the United States would not be pleased with a true Japanese volunteer army protecting the land of Japan. After he finished reading his prepared speech in a few minutes' time, Mishima cried out, "Long live the Emperor," 3 times. He then retreated in the commandment offices, apologized to the commandment, saying, quote, We did it to return JSDF to the Emperor. I had no choice but to do this. Mishima then committed seppuku, a form of ritual suicide by disembowelment associated with the samurai. Morita had been assigned to serve as Mishima's second, cutting off his head with a sword at the end of the ritual to spare him unnecessary pain. However, Morita proved unable to complete this task, and after 3 failed attempts to sever Mishima's head, Kogo had to step in and complete the task. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Good Lord. According to the testimony of the surviving coup members, originally all 4 Tatanokai members had planned to commit seppuku along with Mishima. However, Mishima attempted to dissuade them, and 3 of the members acquiesced to his wishes. Only Morita persisted, saying, I can't let Mr. Mishima die alone. But Mishima knew that Morita had a girlfriend and still hoped he might live. Just before his seppuku, Mishima tried one more time to dissuade him, saying, Morita, you must live, not die. Nevertheless, after Mishima's seppuku, Morita knelt and stabbed himself in the abdomen, and Koga acted as Kaishakunen again. Sorry for the pronunciation there, but the coup attempt is called the Mishima incident in Japan. It is extremely famous, and
Shakunin.
a graphic, and horrifying end to a really a tragic life of a lot of conflict, but I mean, went out the way that you kind of would have
He
expected him to.
practiced what he preached 100%.
That much is true, right? Yeah, I mean, he was a planned suicide is a way of putting it. I mean, talk about a plan. I mean, his lifetime of planning it, but like once again, as it's mentioned, we've mentioned before, and I've at least said before, I don't feel like this is just a horrible. I wish better for Japanese culture than this to be a part of it, because I do think it's. I mean, the coup had failed. He probably would have been imprisoned, and to take
He
one's life
was
in such a
he
horrible way.
if he wanted to either die fighting or just die, well, after he was embarrassed, he's like, all right, that's only one way to go from here. I was laughed at. Um, but before he was before they kicked him out of the military for consumption or tuberculosis, uh, he did pilot, and he did work with everyone. Like there was a time where he was where he might have went out to do it, and he said, what did he say? He said um like the camaraderie like during that was just he liked it. um and his favorite Jisei, which is a death poem of the kamikaze, is at the moment I am full of life, my whole body overflowing with youth and strength. It seems impossible that I shall be dead in 3 hours time, and yet um but I think like you said, he's always had this like idea of the like this suicidal ideation and like a affinity for the macabre, like just wanting to die for something greater than himself. But if you ask me, he almost figured it out. Like there was one point where he describes when he was test piloting this thing for Lockheed, or like just doing one of the piloting things.
Right.
Um, he had to combine like the mental aspect of the like breathing exercises for the G forces, as well as like the physical aspect of like piloting the plane. So when he was strained by the G forces, having to rely on absolutely everything, like both his mind and body, uh with the outsides of the plane being like, inside is the life, outside is death, just because he's going like, hundreds of miles an hour, 45,000 feet in the air. He said he at that one time it became like Hellenistic, where both ideas, um the inverses, or the what's the word I'm looking for, the contradictions between it, and like the contradiction between physically doing and like thinking about it, kind of combined into what he described as a titanic snake eating its own tail, or an
Right. This
Ouroboros.
circles this actually ties in perfectly with the image. There's an image. Errol's going to send me this image. I'll post it on our Twitter page too. There's like this beautiful um, portrait that he shared with me today that was like very emblematic of Yukio Mishima just as a person in his life journey. So we're going to post that also on the Twitter page along with the article in relation to his response to the nuclear strikes as well.
But yeah,
Go ahead and continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
oh yeah, no, he just like while he was doing that in that moment of like perfection of focusing both his body and his mind, uh it's kind of weird that he just perceived like an Ouroboros, which is, the dichotomy. It's a symbol that just it's the yin and yang, it's night and
Right.
day. And that's also when his, like, yeah, like I said, his mental was just fused with his physical. But if you ask me, I think that while he was close with like a really good idea of like a true philosophy of life is just working on yourself. I do believe that it is something more than that, and it does help when you can combine both of those aspects. But
Yeah.
I don't think it leans one way just like it doesn't lean another.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the fusing is a great term because it really was like he had like this fusing of like multiple philosophies across different domains, including like Greek philosophy and Western philosophy, and then obviously most importantly to him, and um, it became a little bit more dissuaded, you could say, his obsession with with like the code of the samurai or like samurai philosophy or warrior philosophy. So like um, yeah, he was just I think a fascinating character, a fascinating figure that like I didn't know much about. And to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about Japanese culture. I realized going through the research for this and how unbelievably rich it is. And um, he's gonna I think serve as a bit of a catalyst for me personally. I want to read. I think I'm probably going to read Confessions of a Mask to start off, and probably before maybe before the end of the year. At least I'm going to try to get to it because I have I've ordered a copy of it, and I want to crack it open and see if I can finish it before the end of the year. But I think it's just there's just a lot to unpack from Japanese culture that I've never really dove into so far in my life. I know Errol, I know you're somewhat well versed in the culture and its history, but for
I try to
myself, go ahead.
I try to I really find just their culture fascinating in general. I'm not as well versed as I like, but to be fair, I don't really know that much about like anything, so it's okay. I know a lot. I know little about a lot, but not a lot.
Yeah, likewise,
You know,
likewise. But it is he's a fascinating person, a fascinating story, and his writing is beautiful. I do know that much so far from what I've read, but I'd really like to hear. I'd like to read more. I'd like to dive in fully to the Confessions of a Mass story, get a better understanding of who he is. Maybe we'll do a follow up on like we've always said this about our podcast. We're like very not beholden to much. Like we're just kind of coursing through as ideas come to us. I mean, we have a very loose schedule in terms of what content we're going to hit, and I always leave this open ended at the end of basically any podcast that we always consider circling back to a topic. Should we find ourselves, I mean, the whole purpose of this podcast, Errol, I don't mean to speak for you, but I know at least for myself, the idea of this podcast is simply that as Errol and I become interested in things, which is a pretty wide scope of ideas, when something hits that quote unquote peripheral angle or that peripheral view for us, I use we're using the podcast as a bit of an opportunity to like hone in on it temporarily as a topic of conversation. So like, um, should a topic call for revisitation? I think that he probably will, and I think Errol, I don't know if we've ever even talked about this, but we probably are going to talk books at some point and do like full dive on full episodes on books. And I'm sure at some point, if we do this long enough, we'll circle back Mishima down the road and talk more about maybe a piece of his writing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that's the story. I think we've hit probably the most important stuff. Not too deep a dive, but enough to get the ball rolling. And hopefully, if you, I do want to know just once more the article on culture.com by Thomas Graham. It was called Yukio Mishima: The Strange Tale of a Japanese Infamous Novelist. I used that as a source, so just a small internet source. Ridiculous History Podcast did a 3-part series on Yukio Mishima. That was another source I used, along with what I thought was the most helpful of all the podcasts that I listened to for him. It's like a 4-part series, I believe, on Yukio Mishima, and that is with Willem Connor, and the podcast is called Historia Dramatica. Great podcast, super informative guy. So if you do listen to us and you're looking for a deeper dive on Yukio Mishima, those are a few of the sources you can use, along with obviously Wikipedia and any other sources you can find. So, Erroll, you want to drop any of your sources on what you utilize to unpack a little Mishima action?
Oh yeah, yeah, I would. So a um a big driver and a lot of the stuff I suggest to you is by this one YouTube channel, Esoterica. Um, it is by I believe he's Dr. Justin Sledge, and he just talks about occult stuff, esoteric knowledge, um, mysticism, and what I what I kind of knew, but like what I didn't understand to the depth of which it was is a lot of magic and like mysticism are all rooted in religion, whether it's just like Judaism with the Kabbalah or just occult practices, which is like Christianity. It's all like, like devil worship and whatnot. Like you don't, it's almost like the Ouroboros. You don't have the negative without the positive.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Occult stuff, like in theory, only works if religion is true. Like if God is, or like, or whatever is real, like then that means like there is a negative to it, kind of thing.
Right.
Um, but he really leans into the kind of the philosophy of that, of the like the mysticism
Perfect.
um Sun and Steel.
Right.
And
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's we didn't mention much about Sun and Steel, but that is also like one of his most revered. That actually like that book actually was like he wrote that while he was going undergoing like the physical transformation, right?
right, where he and that's where he put the value of his physical body over his over the mental, because you could prove so much with the mental, which is just words, which doesn't matter, but like your body is a canvas that is like you can physically see, and then that whatever you see is like the fruit of your labor.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's the spots then. You can hit those spots up. If you're looking for a deeper dive, I love it. That's actually an interesting YouTube page then for way beyond just this topic. You can
Oh
probably
my God, yeah, way beyond. If you like I'm talking anything occult.
cool.
There's a rhyme or reason behind it, and this dude busts out the texts. He doesn't play around.
Yeah.
Esoterica on YouTube. This episode would have been yeah, influenced by Yukio or Mishima, the philosophy of Sun and Steel.
Awesome. All right, perfect. Well, that's it for tonight's podcast. This was the fourth installment of our biography series on Yukio Mishima. We did it the best we could just to kind of course through, hit the plot points of an important figure in Japan. Perfect double feature with the previous episode we did on silence. If you're looking to dive back after completing this episode and stay in the Far East and hear our discussion about a couple hundred years prior in the film Silence by Martin Scorsese, which came out in 2016, but the plot actually takes place a few hundred years prior, back in the 17th century. and an important film. Also, a lot of Japanese philosophy, a lot of Buddhist philosophy, alongside a lot of Christian philosophy in that film. And Erroll and I did a pretty decent job of unpacking that film and talking about its weaknesses along with its many, many strengths, which was also a great episode and a great talk. So feel free to bounce back and check that one out. We appreciate you guys listening. Any support you guys give us is always super appreciated. We love to have as many listeners as we can, and we hope to grow and develop more listenership along the way. Let's hit the outro housekeeping. We are on X at peripheral V123. Check us out also on soundcloud.com/peripheral views 123. Our YouTube channel, just throw us in the search bar, Peripheral Views Podcast. All our content's up on there. Um, it's just audio. One day, I think at some point, Errol and I will probably evolve into a video podcast, so you guys can get acquainted with our wonderful faces. But as of now, it's just an audio feed through the YouTube. If that just happens to be the platform you use most, you can find us on there. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and for YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, all three. Please, please, we beg of you. We don't beg too deeply, but we need it. We need some support. We'd love the support. We appreciate the support. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Very important to us to continue developing and growing the podcast. And if you like what you hear and you want to continue to support us, great place to catch our content as well is at peripheralviewspodcast.com. Them's the breaks right there, dog. We're closing this one out. Errol, you got any concluding thoughts on Yukio Mishima or the podcast in general?
Um, it would just be on Mishima. Like I said, I feel like it's a good message when not taken literally, I guess. Like it's a good it's definitely good to stand for something, but I believe in his one quote, there's not really a lot of opportunities to have a heroic death nowadays, and that's a good thing. It is a good thing. Um, so this having like this like suicidal ideation, I mean, unless like you're like I don't know, like legitimately like a soldier or something like that, um, while is romanticized and like it could be cool, I don't think it's a good reason just to lift weights on the off chance you need to end it all right there. So it's inspired me to start working on it a little bit. Just the more like, treating my body like the temple it is. Like,
Well, almost
you're
like the flip of it is like, and I hate to quote Arthur Brooks again, but he's been like kind of on my mind in the last few weeks, just having listened to a few podcasts and a little bit of reading. One of the three important questions that are related to happiness, and I won't quote all three, but I'll drop at least one here. Is one of those questions is what would you die for? And like it's not important to have convictions in this world, but it's also important to have. It's not important to die for something, but it's important to maybe have something to die for, something that you believe in. Like it's a very faith based thing to do that, and I think that's what Mishima had. And you may not agree with it. I don't think I do. I think that his like nationalism was entrenched in. Um, I suppose that that might be my ignorance that prevents me from like understanding it well. But from the chair I'm sitting in, I think that nationalism wouldn't be one of my things to die for. But um, you know, this is we live in a different time and in a different place. So, but his convictions and his true dedication to what he believed was unquestioned. Um,
Yeah, no, there's not really a lot when he not a lot of times where his conviction wavered all the way up till the end.
yeah. So that's it. That's the guy. That's the figure. Important guy. Lot to read upon. If you want to continue the conversation with your with the content out there that we listed, and
Oh
furthermore,
yeah, because we definitely just this was more of a just like
surface
blowing
ski.
Yeah, we blew the dust off of, the chest there.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Without like we blew
Yep.
the dust off the thumos off the chest, not
Yeah.
the
And maybe at some point down the road we'll crack the book open, But if we don't, feel free to dive in yourselves. We appreciate you guys checking in with us. We hope you found this moderately informative and somewhat interesting. But that's it for us on the Peripheral Views podcast. Thank you guys again for joining us. Before we go, we should announce we'll be off next week. Nothing coming next week, but the following week we'll be sitting down to record a standalone podcast. This episode is not going to fall into our series that we typically do on music, biographies, histories. None of those series will be a part of this podcast. This will be a standalone piece that Erroll and I are in the beginning stages of development on. And it is going to be, I'm not sure if we've decided on an exact title, but in general, it's going to be a discussion piece, and that's going to be backed with some evidentiary claims or some research. We're not just going to be spitting off the cuff here, but we're going to be discussing.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, there'll be a little bit for sure. I mean, yeah, this is a podcast after all. We'll be regurgitating facts half-heartedly. But that podcast is coming out in 2 weeks. We're going to record it. It's going to be on the hypersexualization of the 21st century. That is a bit of a loaded title, and it's also a loose title and working title for the podcast. But generally, you can expect something of a discussion on that. And I'll announce now, I suppose we might as well. So that we're off next week. That one will be dropped in 2 weeks. The podcast to follow that, we have decided is going to be a return to the ranking show. Another one to look forward to. So you got two in the chamber. I won't tell you exactly what's coming for the ranking show, but just know that in addition to the ranking show, that will be appropriate for the month of October for sure. You guys, that's my hint drop for that. That's coming after the next podcast in a couple of weeks. So
yeah, and who knows? I might just start a video channel where I don't talk at all and I just lift weights.
I'll watch
after the whole Mishima thing. I might just
just
done
curling
with the podcast.
No sound period. No, actually
Yeah.
Sound. Just no music. Just right. You just grunting.
Exactly.
Just sweating.
That's all that I care about.
just curling them weights. Errol's about to get built. He's about to get swole. On that lovingly note, let's close it out. Thank you guys again for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Errol's weightlifting YouTube channel, and be sure to check back in with us in a couple of weeks. We'll be discussing the hypersexualization of the 21st century. Check back in with us then. Can't wait to talk to you guys again. Thanks again for listening.